First of all, I'm only watching Bitcoin because I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, and that's the only one I really care about. So I'm watching Bitcoin with a great deal of interest, and there's a number of indicators I look at, like Stablecoin AUM, um, interest payments on debt. I think the U.S. dollar and Bitcoin are very much linked together, and just general things like demand from ETFs and from corporate players like MicroStrategy.
Let's talk about those three things you just mentioned and start with stablecoin AUM. Why is it important for folks who are investing in Bitcoin, who are watching Bitcoin, to pay attention to what's happening in the stablecoin markets?
Right. So I think it is important because it's an indicator of overall interest and demand. And what we've seen is the demand for stablecoins has just been going up and to the right nonstop. We're seeing more and more adoption, especially of USDT in global markets where they're quite dominant. And it's being used in LATAM and other markets as just digital dollars. They don't even call it a stablecoin. They don't call it Tether. They don't call it USDT. They just say digital dollar. So it's become ubiquitous. And I think that is a gateway into other assets like Bitcoin. So it's a good indicator of where Bitcoin is going, but it is going, it is going up all the time. And another parallel to that is Bitcoin hash rate. That's another indicator I think that is very important to watch. We're at 740 exahash now, which is all-time highs for Bitcoin hash rate. That's the power that's supporting the Bitcoin network. And that is a really good indicator of where things are going in terms of price, because usually it's a leading indicator and it dictates where price is going. And all-time high for hash rate usually will lead to an all-time high in price. It's like you're happy both ways. You're happy when it goes up because obviously it's up, but you're also happy when it goes down because you're accumulating more Bitcoin
Hmm.
and maybe lowering your cost basis for acquisition of Bitcoin. But the Bitcoin is a very interesting asset because it is a bearer asset. You can hold it yourself. There, the supply schedule is fixed, right? Every 4 years there's a halving, and it's like every 10 minutes there's a block. There's not that much to worry about if you're a hodler, or what we call people that hold Bitcoin. So you can kind of put it into cold storage, turn your phone off or your computer off, and just go travel and read books for a year and come back, and you'll see what happens. Like, the price probably will go up. But it differs from things like fiat money, where you have to pay attention. You have to be watching the Federal Reserve. You have to dial into the FOMC meetings and hang on to every word being said. If you're holding equities, you have to pay attention too. So I think it's a very different thing. And as people understand this interesting property of Bitcoin, that you just buy and hold it for long periods of time, more people will start to understand that the short-term price volatility is really a distraction. You're not buying Bitcoin for the gains in the next year. You're buying Bitcoin for the gains in 10, 20 years, which is almost guaranteed.
As someone who believes in decentralization, talk to me a little bit about the launch of the ETFs, nation state adoption. Do you think that brings some centralization to Bitcoin? Does that worry you at all when we look at the ethos of Bitcoin?
A nation state adopting Bitcoin is literally the separation of money and state. It's a voluntary separation. And I think that is a good path to pursue and to advocate for. It reduces the power of the state. It separates the ability to print money out of thin air from the state by them adopting Bitcoin. The second point I would make to that is it is a good thing for price insensitive investors like nation states to get into Bitcoin, because they effectively have unlimited funds to print money with. Like, they can print money. So if they want Bitcoin, I think that starts to solve some of that problem. It alleviates some societal problems too when we inevitably rebase to a Bitcoin standard. If they start sooner rather than later, then it's easier to onboard hundreds of millions of people and billions of people into a Bitcoin standard. But the key thing is, like, they will be buyers of Bitcoin once they understand that Bitcoin is valuable and they want it. So that money will just flow into Bitcoin. There's just no accountability. At least with institutional funds, they technically need to get the money from people that invest into them and then deploy it. But a nation state can just turn on a fire hose and inject money into Bitcoin. But also that applies to mining as well. I think nation states mining are also going to be less price sensitive compared to, I don't know, more corporate company level miners, which might need to sell Bitcoin to pay power bills. But
Mm.
most energy companies are state owned. And if you see the merger between mining Bitcoin and energy, they do need a base load consumption or usage of the base load. So as it becomes one and the same, that a energy company is a Bitcoin mining company, you'll see less volatility in the market because they're not needing to sell Bitcoin.
Mm.
They're just mining Bitcoin because they have excess energy. But I think we're already seeing the market move away from that with companies like Marathon buying Bitcoin instead of selling Bitcoin. There's no reason at all for a public mining company to be selling any Bitcoin. They should be pursuing the MicroStrategy playbook, which is debt to buy more Bitcoin on top of what they are already mining. But back to the original point, I don't think Bitcoin is incompatible with centralized entities holding Bitcoin because the network itself is decentralized. And I think you have to run it through, um, run through the plays in your head. Like, if Bitcoin is valuable, countries will inevitably want it, just like they want gold and other things. So sooner or later, countries will want Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin has been designed in such a way that large holders like countries or institutions having Bitcoin does not impact the network itself, because while Bitcoin is in the financial system now because it is connected through the ETFs, it is still separate from the financial system. So the financial system can drive Bitcoin price short term based on the equities markets or whatnot, but it is totally separate. And like I said before, you can just have your Bitcoin in cold storage, and then at that point, you're totally disconnected from everything. They can do everything they want on this side, issue paper Bitcoin. Hedge funds can short it on derivatives exchanges and whatnot, but you still have your Bitcoin and it's always in your possession in cold storage.
What's the biggest misconception you think people have about Bitcoin?
That's an interesting one. I think there's two big ones. One is that you need to trust Bitcoin. And I hear this from time to time, like, I don't really know about Bitcoin. I don't really trust it. But the whole point of Bitcoin is that you don't need to trust Bitcoin. You can verify the code and you can check the math. So you can audit the supply instantly. The other one is that people don't understand how scarce Bitcoin is. So in this last few months, I've been engaging with some politicians in Asia where I was traveling, and it always comes down to, we'll look into it later, but there is no later. I think the opportune time to get into Bitcoin likely has already passed. So if you look at who's holding a lot of Bitcoin, MicroStrategy has 220,000. The ETFs in the US have about 900,000. And then you have all the other various holders, like Bitfinex has a large chunk. There's the BitMEX insurance fund, and Binance has a good chunk too. But there is not a lot of room to increase holdings at this point. So if you ask yourself, can the US ETFs increase from 900,000 to 2 million Bitcoin, like 10% of the supply? That is going to be exponentially harder than what they've accomplished now in terms of accumulation, because there's not a lot of Bitcoin left. If you look at the ETF holdings of different regions, the US with 900,000, Hong Kong, which came after the US, they have, I think, 4,500 ish now, Australia, 100 something. So both of those regions waited until the US went okay and said go for the ETFs, and then they launched theirs. But launching second and third does no service to you because they've already got the lion's share. And I think it's going to be the same for nation state level accumulation because there's just not a lot left. So can MicroStrategy grow their stack from 220 to 440? I don't see it happening because there's just not a lot there. The ETFs can't double their stack either. So once this incredible scarcity of Bitcoin really hits home and everyone starts to grok that, I believe the price is going to start to appreciate very rapidly. Reiterating what I'm saying, there is just so little Bitcoin out there. You can't double your holdings as a large entity at this point. So it's going to shoot up. The pressure has to be alleviated in other ways. So what I see right now is Bitcoin's like a beach ball, and we're pushing it underwater right now, and people are starting to get bored. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's paper Bitcoin shorting Bitcoin and pushing the price down, but that is not sustainable simply because there's so much buy demand. E- Every quarter, Tether is going to be buying Bitcoin. Every couple months, MicroStrategy is buying, Semler is buying, and we're going to see more and more of that. The one of the largest pension funds in the world in Korea is allocating to MicroStrategy now. So you can see the tide already turning. But just like in The Big Short, the market takes time to realize what's happening. It's always going to be the people that are paying attention to Bitcoin that see all these factors and are allocating to it. This is why Michael Saylor is going to try to buy as much as he can right now.
Are there any particular nations that you can tell us about that have a really progressive uh, take, or they have a really progressive policy or look at what they want to do with Bitcoin?
I think there is always more interest when the price is going up and when the price is flat. But there's definitely a comparison. If you look at ordinary people, they want to buy Bitcoin when it's at all-time highs. They're not interested when we're down in the 50s, right? And it's the same thing. Like everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. But we do have a lot of interesting conversations going on. The challenge is for us working on nation state adoption is that we have to work with the governments, and there's a lot of turnover, and there are a lot of challenges internally to work with these governments. Sometimes we make a lot of headway, and the government's overthrown, and we have to start from zero. So it's a process. It's not like walking into Walmart to buy a toaster. And I think it just has to do with people being unaware of the key properties of Bitcoin, why you want Bitcoin, and the incredible scarcity of Bitcoin. But it is changing because we haven't done any big announcements, but we have been meeting with politicians and regulators throughout the world this year, and we are telling them these things. And usually at the end of those meetings, you see a light behind their eyes, like they're thinking about it now that we've laid it out flat for them on the table, and they're seeing that, okay, there's not a lot left. And if we wait for, say, the strategic Bitcoin reserve, you're going to have the US with the lion's share of Bitcoin, and you'll be lucky if you have 100 right at that point. It'll be the exact same scenario as the ETF. So I think we just have to keep on working and pushing that, and hopefully we get a second El Salvador this year. I'm hoping it will be Argentina personally, but the second one will likely kick things into high gear.